and other people can't. And so for me to say you should, go out there and do it, I don't have to suffer the consequences. So I frankly have to say that this is one of the most well-organized events and groups at any campus I've ever spoken on, and I've spoken at hundreds. Keep doing what you're doing is my basic answer. I mean, getting people here talking about it, not being silenced the way that is so imposed upon Muslim and Arab people in this country in particular. I think you're doing great already.
The woman standing there.
Israel created instant messaging. Found that too. Say one more time. Israel created instant messaging.
Is the occupation being paid for by instant messaging? I mean, I think we always have to balance the amount of benefit we're getting something versus how much harm it's doing. I mean, if instant messaging is supporting the gross oppression of people's rights, separating people's schools and lands by what religion they are or what ethnicity they are, I think we have to balance that towards, I don't know, the luxury of instant messaging. I have a hard time believing that this is being supported by instant messaging, but this is the idea, is that we have to balance. Of course, it's uncomfortable, right? We want to find an easy way that requires zero sacrifice and just kind of bring everyone together, and maybe if we all listen to each other, it'll end. No, it's uncomfortable. It's not going to be a voluntary thing. We have to create the circumstances such that it's no longer possible for Israel to do what it's doing. And if not instant messaging is what it takes, I would have to do some research. But if that was what it would take, then of course, that's what we do. That's what we have to do.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Hey, thank you so much for coming to this culture. I just wanted to commend you for the grace by which you accept disagreement from others. And I was wondering what you think about the idea of this conflict being framed along ethnic lines in the Western media. How it's perceived as Arab versus Jew, or Palestinian versus Israeli. Do you think it's more of a human rights issue, or do you think it's an issue based on race or religion?
This is a good question. I mean, I very much grew up with the notion that this was a religious war, that this was just because, Jews and Muslims just could never get along, and there was not much to be done about it. And then, of course, soon I learned that actually Jews and Muslims and Christians, all Palestinian, had been coexisting relatively well in the area before this institution of separation. So that's one testimony to the fact that if this were about religion, it wouldn't be such a new thing. What you have, and if you look, for example, at the fact that so many Israelis themselves are critical of the occupation, not as many critical of Zionism, but that is still a growing minority. The number of Israelis going into the occupied territories, working alongside Palestinians, for me it's as much a question of Jews versus Palestinians as let's say the civil rights movement in this country was about blacks versus whites. Was it really all the blacks against all the whites? No, it was about human rights. And that's why you saw white people in solidarity with the people of color in struggling against that. And so for me, really, it is clearly about human rights. And I think anyone who actually takes the time to go there and see the kind of cooperation going on, as well as the actual implementation of the policies done in the name of security, but in practice have nothing to do with it. They're much more consistent with the drive for control and power over resources in the area without the people on them. Because if you let them have equal rights, then you lose your Jewish majority. And that has been prioritized over equal rights and democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Balter. As I said before, we have a little surprise for you all. We'd like to introduce Dr. Ilan Pape to give a quick little introduction to his talk tonight. And I'd like to remind everyone that there's no more question and answer. If you would like to ask Dr. Ilan Pape follow-up questions to his little introduction, please come to tonight's event and you can ask him then.
I won't take much of your time. I know you're baked in the sun, and this is not the Israel barbecue event. I would like to just mention a few things. Hearing the previous speaker, Anna, and thinking about the event you're all part of. And I thought that we all should think about ourselves especially if we live here, as VIPs. And I'll explain what I mean by VIPs, which I think is a good program for activism in the next year, for anyone who's interested in what goes on in Palestine, and for anyone who's committed to the cause of peace and justice in Palestine. The V stands for visit. If you can, go and visit. And if you can't go into the occupied territories, go and visit Israel and meet the Palestinians there. And if you can't do that, go and visit the Palestinians in the refugee camps. There is a sense among the Palestinian communities on the ground that the world is forgetting them. And I think any visit by any activist, for as long as one can be there, is highly important for feeling that there is a connection between the people here and the people there, because it's a common struggle for justice and peace. People who are there always appreciate and respect the need to, the ability of people to come to see for themselves on the ground what goes on. And if you can't do it physically, do it virtually, through the internet, through any means of connection. So the I stands for inform. In this country, more than in any other country in the globe, you need to inform people, because the mainstream media continues after 60 years to lie and fabricate. It's amazing. This is the 21st century, where so much information is accessible. So much data is now available. People have been to the place. People have talked about the place, and yet you open the TV channels that report about things which are happening there, you read the newspapers, the tabloids, all the respectable newspapers, and you hear the main lectures in the campuses, and you just can't believe the fabrications, the lies, and the stories that are being told of a place where there is a simple and very terrible crime committed on a daily basis ever since 1948 until today. So let's inform people by any means we have of what goes on there. Let us not succumb to the main Israeli propaganda about the complexity of what goes on there, as if there is a complex story which actually only the Israelis can explain to the Americans. It's not a complex story, unfortunately. It's a very simple story of oppression, colonization, occupation, uprooting, and dispossession. It happened before, it's happening in other places in the world, but it's the only place in the world where things which happen on the ground are being misrepresented constantly, especially in this country, as a justification for an American policy that continues to support the criminal policies of the State of Israel on the ground. And the P stands for protest. Protest. Continue to protest. It's quite unthinkable and bewildering to think about the PR that accompanies the events in Tibet. I'm all for protesting against the political imprisonment of people in Tibet. I can understand the feeling and the emotions of those people who wanted to disrupt the Olympic torch on its way to Beijing. But when you read the newspapers here and you want to find an explanation why our Americans are called upon to take a tough action against the Chinese wherever they are because of the Tibet issue, you read that the main problem in China is, in Tibet is, that there are more than 150 political prisoners. There are 10,000 political prisoners in the occupied territories. Half of them are children. So if we are called upon even by senators and representatives of the House and the main journalists to protest against China, we should do even more to protest against Israel. And there is no reason to celebrate 60 years of independence tomorrow or in this month. There is no reason to celebrate. The only thing that we should do is remind the world in this month why there is no reason to celebrate, why there is only reason to commemorate the past, because the evils of the past, the crimes of the past, continue